Hello, my name is Matteo Arena. I'm the chair of the finance department here at Marquette. Thank you for, on behalf of our department and the College of Business, thank you for attending and participating today. And thank you for Chris for putting up this great event. And I need to share something about Chris. He's a part-time participating faculty in our department, but he's working as much as a full-time faculty. That's on top of his full-time job at Baird. So I don't know how he does it, but I'm not complaining. So thank you. So we had a great first panel discussion. The second one now is going to be on the issuer side of ESG and sustainability. So I'd like to invite to the stage Trevor Dunaway. He's going to moderate the panel. He's Senior Audit Manager at KPMG. And then Paul Nowak, Vice President at Quad Packaging. Adam Mueller-Weiss, that is Chief Sustainability Officer at Clarios. Rafe Goldman, General Counsel at Optimus Solutions. And also, we'll have Beth Straka. She's VP of Investor Relations at We Energy. She will join us virtually. Thank you.
All right, like it was mentioned, this session here is with the issuers, and my name is Trevor Dunaway. I'm a senior manager with KPMG Impact, and KPMG Impact is our global investment with local resources to really provide those strategic ESG from a holistic service provider viewpoint. Really excited for this conversation here today. We've had several touch points ahead of time. And really excited to pull from my experiences and guide us through this conversation. Those experiences include providing reasonable and limited assurance over ESG reporting. I also help with companies in their strategy development around process areas and control implementation with some of those larger Fortune 100 companies. And then finally, in support of that global baseline of a standard, work with KPMG and the other big four firms in the development of the stakeholder capitalism metrics with the World Economic Forum. With that, today's conversation is focused from the company lens. And we really like to think about the company lens beginning with that assessment phase, guiding us through evaluating the maturity of a company, going to the implementation, looking at it through the lens of what's required today to make these investments in an organization, ultimately leading through to measurement, reporting, and then assurance. Through the standard session, there was writing a lot of notes of keywords that we kind of talked about already that we wanted to cover, so it was great that the standard session was there because a lot of those key points were discussed is exactly what these practitioners here from a company lens will be able to comment on. With that, would like for each of us to go through a quick introduction, maybe where your organization is from a maturity assessment around ESG. And then given that ESG has a unique element within an organization around the different stakeholders that have a responsibility, kind of what your role is in your organization's ESG strategy development, and really what's top of mind for you. And with Beth being virtual, we'll start with you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And again, thanks, Trevor, for moderating today. And I'd like to thank Chris and certainly Baird and Marquette for including me in this really important discussion. I'm Beth Straka, Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications and Investor Relations at WEC Energy Group, which is the parent company for We Energies. We are the nation's leading energy company with operational expertise and financial resources to meet the electric and natural gas needs of more than 4.6 million customers across the Midwest. And I'm also pleased to report to you today that we're the largest renewable energy investor in Wisconsin. So we have some of the most aggressive carbon goals in the industry, and I'm pleased to say that they are in line with the Paris Climate Accord, and I'm sure we'll have much discussion about that in the minutes to come. In my capacity, I do have the privilege to oversee all of our ESG communication and strategy. I'm also privileged to oversee our charitable giving practices. And for those of you who may have happened to catch the journal this past week. WEC Energy Group, and We Energies is the second largest charitable giver in the state of Wisconsin. So we're obviously very pleased about that in the full ESG spectrum as well. For me, in terms of what is most important, most top of mind, it's achieving measurable and sustainable results. And certainly our 100-page corporate responsibility report endeavors to do that. It's our effort at being as transparent as possible. And in terms of what is most important to us, being affordable, being reliable, and clean. And we believe that there's a roadmap to achieve all of these things in a measured way. Look forward to today's discussion.
I'm Riv Goldman. I'm the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Optimus Solutions. Optimus is a global manufacturer and distributor of fasteners. I am inside of a company that's the one that we've been talking about a lot. We're about $700 million, so I consider us on the small side. And we are going through exactly that journey of finding opportunities in the ESG space that also fit within our business strategy. And we are finding them. And I think that there is a whole lot of energy in corporations where you can marry it up with your business strategies to really be doing things to advance all of our goals around ESG.
Accounting has been described as the language of business. And I think what we're talking about here today is the extended vocabulary of a well-managed business, or if you may, a good business. My name's Adam Mueller-Weiss. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at Clarios. And what we're trying to do is take that vernacular and turn it into an embedded aspect of everything we do in our business through what we call our sustainability blueprint. It guides how we manufacture and are the largest manufacturer of low voltage batteries for vehicles. These batteries are critical for vehicles of all kinds, from internal combustion engines to the latest EVs, for them to start, keep people safe, and operate efficiently. So how do we use that vocabulary? How do we put it into language that can not only be understood by the street or investors, but our employees, our customers, our stakeholders? And that's really what we have done through our journey, which is beginning with the sustainability blueprint. That is looking forward to embedding many of these standards, but really focused on moving from a metaphor of focused on just doing less bad to doing more good. And how can we generate more positive value, not only for our bottom line, but for society as a whole.
And I'm Paul Nowak. I'm with Quad, integrated marketing partner. I'm going to take a slightly different tack today. I'm very client-facing. So what I work with as far as our stakeholders and our ESG is bringing the client voice in continuously to what we're working on. So some examples of that, we'll work with companies like Walmart or CVS to look at their brand and how that comes differently. And we'll work with CPGs like General Mills or Conagra to look at that also. The example I'd use here is what's the difference here? So if you see this, whether it's in a report or it's being reported out, versus if a consumer looks at it, how will they rate it differently?
Wonderful, really excited for this discussion. Given that we were just following the standards panel, watching that and listening, I wrote down a lot of some keywords. So confusion, double materiality, enterprise value, broader stakeholders, market-led, regulatory. We know from the earlier presentation that we have the alphabet soup of standards. I want to kick off this question to Beth. Given the lack of harmonization in standards, what's assisted you in the development of your ESG journey and finding what standards to really focus on as you get started?
That's a great question, Trevor. And I think when we had our initial discussion, we joked that initially this really was characterized as the wild, wild west in terms of the breadth and depth of questions that we were getting. And how is it that we go about standardizing what we communicate, what is important? And I'd first like to say that I've had tremendous support from our highest level of leadership. That would be our board of directors and specifically our executive chair, and that has helped a tremendous amount. We've also had a great deal of collaboration industry-wide. Of course, the electric utility industry is very, very big, as is the gas industry, the gas distribution industry. So we have the benefit of the Edison Electric Institute and the American Gas Association to help in trying to form a standardization and a framework for our reporting. And so that's been tremendously helpful. Internally, what we embarked upon a little more than a year ago was our own priority sustainability issue assessment. And we solicited the assistance of EPRI, which is another independent industry expert, and they helped us in over about a 9-month period in developing our priority sustainability issues. And we polled both internal stakeholders, but also importantly, key external stakeholders, from our customers to non-governmental organizations, academic institutions, and suppliers, just to name a few. Of course, investors are very, very important as well. And the goals that we came up with ultimately that were approved by our board of directors very much align with the UN's SDGs too, something that we felt we wanted to make sure that we incorporated as we thought about this. I'm not going to go through all 17 of our priority sustainability issues, given the short amount of time we have together today, but they wouldn't surprise you, from climate strategy to customer satisfaction, cybersecurity, health and safety of our employees, contractors, and the public. Financial discipline certainly rose to the top, as well as supply chain integrity and innovation and stakeholder transparency, just to name a few. This priority sustainability issue assessment is helping us to drive our decision making throughout the organization. And I think the results are pretty clear as we've navigated through this over the past several years.
Wonderful. And Paul, I'd be interested to hear your perspective from that as well, given your chief sustainability role.
Again, take the perspective of the $600, $700 million private company looking at this landscape over the past 5 years. Where was it that it was coming at us? It was coming at us from our customers. So we are a distributor of parts to auto industry, Europe, US, Asia. As we all know, Europe has been ahead of us, maybe driven by regulation. I guess that's all, that might be an opinion, but certainly ahead of us. And so we had European car manufacturers, Peugeot, Renault, whoever, who wanted to say to their customers, we're green, we're sustainable. And not only that, we impose those standards on our suppliers. And so the auto industry in Europe, EcoVadis was the rating agency that they chose they wanted to use. So to say to us, Optimus, you have to use EcoVadis. And you have to answer the EcoVadis questions, and you have to get the external party to come and certify according to the EcoVadis standards. And this replicates itself when we sell into medical equipment or whatever other industry or whatever different part of the world. Tremendous amount of money, of resources in the organization trying to comply with these different requests from customers. When I was in I've been doing compliance, general compliance, code of ethics for the past 20, 30 years. And it was the same thing when companies first issued, code of ethics. And all of the end customers in the B2B world would come back to its suppliers and say, you have to adopt our code of ethics. Well, you weren't going to write 40 million different codes of ethics, right? So what you'd say is, conceptually, we're in the same place you are. We're a great supplier. Here's our code. It's good enough. What I'm hoping is that in this space, whether it's SASB or whoever, that we'll have metrics that we are doing this now, that going back to these demanding OEM customers and saying, here's what we're doing in this space. And it's going to have to satisfy, because you can't satisfy 4 million questioners. So that's where we're at.
I mean, I would add into that, so thanks for bringing up the consumer journey in that. And I think, so the last panel talked really well about this, saying, you know, one thing is not going to fit all. So materiality to you as a brand or as a company becomes really important in how you look at that, right? And so it's not going to be what this company does and that company does. So for us, the consumer piece of it, driving the lens to say, where do I spend my time on each standard, becomes really important. Because the organizations I'm working with or the clients I'm working with, they do have limited resources. They do have limited time. They can't chase every standard. So having the standards be as clear as possible absolutely would help. But bouncing up against what's really good for the client, and in this case, the client for me can mostly is concerned with what the consumer wants. And we heard the consumer shifting, right? We heard that in the last panel, and what their employee or their human capital group wants. So putting those lenses on it first and then moving it against the standard is where I'm really seeing that come together.
So we had a unique opportunity being a standalone company, a new company just a couple of years ago, but a heritage that goes back well over a century. We were part of a multi-industrial company based here in Milwaukee that was considered a leader in this space. So we had a couple options. You know, we could follow what others were doing in our sector. We could lift and shift was some of the terminology we're using from our previous owner and parent, or we could take a different look. We decided to do just that. Instead of starting completely from a blank slate, we started from a blank page and said, what is truly important here? How do we distill this language with all these words and all these, you know, rules and syntax and things like that? And so you can get caught up in this space. You can really miss the trees in the forest. And the challenge is, you know, turning this back into something that is meaningful, actionable, and something that relates to every aspect of our business, from people on the plant floor to someone dealing with investors or future investors and explaining who we are and where we're going. So that's where we tried, and I mentioned this journey and this sustainability blueprint. We tried to distill this down into 5 key principles. And certainly you can map this to myriads of standards, but just to be able to communicate it around the things that are important to us. Value. Making sure we understand that we're all business people. When we make investments, be it in compliance with a standard, if it's voluntary, or how we comply, that there's an investment associated with that. And how do we get the kind of return that's expected from that investment? Operational excellence. What we make and do is important. We make electrochemical batteries. At any stage of a life cycle of a product, there's the potential to cause harm, regardless of what you use to make it in a battery. And so that's why life cycle stewardship was a key principle. So how do we manage and steward the products that we have? We have been the beneficiaries of generations before us who have developed the world's leading example of a circular economy. So the batteries we make come from used batteries we collect at auto parts stores, dealers, and repair shops around North America and around the world. So how do we turn that into a transparent set of measures, accounting data points and KPIs that we can communicate with our stakeholders? But even more important, we play a role and a critical role in advocating for what the future world looks like, particularly for energy storage, clean technology, and a battery economy. So if you look at that, it conveniently spells out Volta, which ties back to the original inventor credited with the electrochemical device. It ties to what we do. It ties to what we make. It ties to a conversation with our customers, with our stakeholders, in a way that transcends maybe the GRI standard, the SASB standard, the alphabet soup. Now, those things are still incredibly important. We're on a journey to try to determine what the right combination and balance is, but it's all driven from those 5 pillars. And that's really what's grounded our strategy moving forward, and really, we believe, is opening up more opportunities to focus on doing more good than just strictly reporting what has happened in the past and maybe focusing on measures that are strictly around doing less bad.
Wonderful. And given that we were just following the standard session there, just open comment here is as we move on in the client's journey, is there any other comments you'd want to add around standards? Do you find significant influence from any particular stakeholders that are really rallying behind certain standards? And has that impacted any of your development of strategy?
I can jump in on that. So generally, when I'm talking to one of my clients, it is cross-functional, right? So you're not just talking to the finance group, you're maybe talking to the CMO, maybe talking to operations. So it's not just going to be coming from one angle when you look at that. And so the alphabet soup wild west of it is they kind of are all looking at different things. And someone, I forget who said it, talked about compensation and how they're being compensated and what their goals are. They can be very different. So the standards across those can change. So, for instance, you might have the brand people really looking to some of the Sustainable Packaging Coalition standards, what they're putting out for a brand that's coming out. You might have the finance group looking more at SASB and going through that. So what I find, what we normally have to do, and you touched on this, you have to go to their base first, and then you have to recognize that you might go into sub-meetings where you have to understand the standards, but it should all tie back to this cultural base of what they're trying to do as an organization. Without that touch point, the Wild West continues, right? The Wild West, we just saw 3-4 new standards coming out, right? Like, it's going to keep going. So I always say foundationally, do that first, be strong there, and then have the right players with you and partners who can help you walk through that.
Well said. I feel that there is a thread of commonality. I think this came out in the prior panel as well. Certainly, we're trying to lead by example. The goals that we have announced and the progress we've made are trying to, prove what is important based on what we've accomplished. But that is through the input, importantly, of many of our key stakeholders, whether they be the investing community, the ESG community. Oftentimes they're one and the same, but not always. And that input, to your question, absolutely has helped to drive some of our strategy on this front as it's evolved.
Yeah, one of the things that we looked at is really this business lens. You have to apply the business lens on everything. The business of business is doing business. So if you have this unique opportunity, we were blessed again to start with a blank page. What is going to resonate? How do we translate this into actionable, materially focused items that are going to improve our business in the short, medium, and long term? How are we going to improve the overall valuation of our company? How are we going to deepen our relationships with our customers, with our stakeholders? So with that lens, it's really no different than maybe any other aspect of our business. And I think sometimes we get caught up in looking at this because it's different, or it's ESG, or maybe we're not familiar with the terminology or metrics. But back to this issue of language, streaming, Googling, net present value at one point in time were not part of our vocabulary, but now they're embedded into everything we do. And I think that's the most important aspect of this, is standards are absolutely important. The alphabet soup, we're all going to struggle with trying to figure that out. You almost need a universal translator sometimes. But it comes back to, what are we here for? It's to manufacture a product, to meet societal needs, and to provide a return to our investors. And by doing it in a responsible way that's minimizing the burdens associated with that product, maximizing the benefits, and doing it in a fair, just, and equitable way, is really encapsulating what we do. It's not a bolt-on, it's not an add-on, it's not a, something that, we have to do because somebody's telling us we need to do it. It's good business, and so that's why we're doing it.
Wonderful. And Adam, I want to come back to you for this question. It was brought up a little bit in the prior panel around commitments. And as a company advances this development of their strategy and journey that we've discussed here so far, companies are making bold commitments right now. And executives are coming out and they're making, big commitments around decarbonization, political donations. There's commitments that come out quite frequently. How has your organization given the risk that exists around those commitments internally and externally, how has your organization really managed those commitments and think about those commitments going forward?
So first and foremost, we agreed that we needed to establish this blueprint to really guide that journey. And one of the elements is transparency. And we decided to take a different path. Instead of signing up for commitments that are coming at us, how do we work methodically to understand what commitments are going to make sense for us, for our business, to be more effective, efficient, and just be a better company? Now, that takes time. And it also takes engagement with stakeholders. It takes engagement with your customers. It also takes knowing where your business may be headed. And so a goal that is strictly focused on the footprint that you have today doesn't acknowledge that your company could look, and we expect our company to look different even 6, 12, 24 months, 5 years, 10 years. So we're taking a different approach that is saying, let's take a step back. And this isn't always easy because we serve some of the same customers you do who are demanding certain commitments and certain things associated with that. But with this lens of looking at doing more good versus doing less bad, there may be opportunities, and it was talked about earlier, where scope 3 emissions can be dramatically reduced by a product or a solution or a way we bring a product to marketplace. That could actually increase our scope 1 and 2 emissions. Now, if we strictly look at a goal based on our footprint, we would be missing an opportunity to have a significant chance at potentially reducing greenhouse gas emissions on a much more significant basis. So that's why we're looking at things like science-based targets, really taking a methodical look at this, rather than just responding to what is the commitment of the day, to really roll up our sleeves and just apply the same kind of business practices we would do with any kind of investment, any kind of commitment to build a new facility, to expand a product line, to enter a new business, to these commitments as well.
Wonderful. And Beth, given your work within the investor population, how do you manage the expectations of the investors? And do you see or hear from investors challenging your organization on those commitments that you've made?
Great question. And, we ended 2020 with a 50% reduction in our carbon dioxide emissions off a 2005 base. So we basically, had achieved our goal early. And so not to rest on our laurels, we swiftly announced early this year, and they are among the most aggressive near-term carbon reduction goals in our industry. Of course, coupled with that strong renewable generation program that I mentioned, but 60% reduction in carbon emissions from our electric generation by 2025. So that is a measurable, near-term, actionable goal that we have the technology to achieve. We have a roadmap to achieve. And I think that is what is important to our key stakeholders. And then we further announced a 60% reduction in carbon emissions from electric generation beyond that, and then an 80% reduction by 2030. And then, of course, that's off a 2005 base too, and then to be net zero by 2050. So these are very, very important goals for the 2025 and the 2030 goal. I'm pleased to say that we have the technology in place, we have the roadmap in place, but to show demonstrable progress, I think is very, very important. And our transparency has been critical. We're in regular communications with one-on-one communications with our investor base, but also importantly, it's not just the corporate responsibility report or our climate report. We do have separate ESG outreach communications dedicated to meeting these individual expectations. Those communications have gone tremendously well for us. We learn so much in those opportunities to engage, and it really has to be kind of an iterative process, and you need the ongoing input from critical stakeholders. So the good news is we've already achieved, one of our more important goals. I'd also like to say that our focus certainly has been on the environmental. I'd like to say in our industry, it's a capital E, but S and G have always been vitally important to us. It's not without good governance, you really can't make progress in any other aspect that is important to us. And we've always been very much dedicated to the S component as well in terms of diversity and inclusion, not only for our board and our executive team, but we want our workforce to resemble the communities that we're privileged to serve, and that's always been a priority as well. So we've had very, very good ongoing engagement, not a lot of pushback, I'm pleased to say, in terms of what we're reporting or the accuracy of what we're reporting, because of course, much of what we report needs to be shared with federal and state agencies in a formal context. So our accuracy has not been challenged.
Wonderful. And as we continue to talk about investors and think about that, some of in the prior panel, there was discussion around value creation and is ESG, it's not just simply an additional cost, right? And as it continues to evolve, I think there's been some migration in hearing companies talk that there really is an opportunity to create value in everything we've talked about from ESG. It's not just a compliance exercise where there's a cost associated with it. It's not just measurement, reporting, and assurance to get a report out there. We'll start maybe with Riv, if you have some ideas around that.
Yeah, Trevor, you said it perfectly. So as I said, the company I'm with, Optimus, is a private company. There's not a lot of demand from a regulatory standpoint for reporting. Certainly in this country, compliance for private companies is limited. So I think that the question that was raised earlier is, so how do we get activity started in the small and the medium companies if we're going to make a change in the world? If we're really going to achieve our sustainability goals? And as I look at carrying this message to my co-leaders, the paid executives who run the company that I'm with on behalf of the private equity investors, and I say, how do I go to them and say, we're a distributor, all of this supply chain mess, it's all coming down on their heads right now. And I'm going to say, I'm sorry, can I take your attention right now and put it over here on these ESG matters? And I'm here to tell you that it's an easy conversation to have. If I say, we are distributors, we run on thin margins, and we need to figure out how to make our distribution centers or our manufacturing use less energy, be more cost efficient, they're going to listen, because that's going to add to the EBITDA of our business. Our huge problem now, you came up earlier today, finding talent, finding labor. If we don't have a safe place for our workers with rapidly moving machinery and with forklifts and high ceilings and all of that in a distribution center, we're not going to get the workers. And so we have to have a safe environment for our mission critical having employees. So that's the conversation I have with the co-leaders across the business. And that's when they pay attention. Now, we're not quite at the point of our investors looking at exiting our business. But when they do, I am convinced that the very real things that we're doing to create value and to make our business more sustainable are going to be reflected in the multiple that they're awarded when they do exit the business. So I am extremely hopeful. In terms of where do you get started, I think SASB industry breakouts give you ideas on where to go and look for savings opportunities. As the comment was made earlier today, there's a whole ecosystem of people who are going to tell you whether you use wind in one part of the country and solar in the other. You don't even have to put out money because they're out there saying, we're going to do gain share on the things that we save money for you in doing. Reporting, we don't have a whole structure for reporting. That's okay, because there's these nifty software tools out there. They don't cost much money and certainly generate the kind of reports that you need if you're going to communicate on every region in every function of your business. So this is entirely doable.
Glad you brought up the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, because we did overlay that important framework into our corporate responsibility report this past year. So very good point that you've made.
You know, to add, could not applaud that more, thank you. You know, when you think about language, and you were talking about the language of it, you know, we've made it out like it's this secret, scary thing, right? ESG and all these terms. And she just walked through safety. She just walked through energy savings. I'm sure that's going to impact your brand in a positive way if you do those right things. So I think it is getting with your internal and external stakeholders and meeting them where they live from a language standpoint, instead of necessarily dropping all the buzzwords on them. So for instance, you know, I was really fortunate. We've worked with Walmart on a food waste project. So we just put a white paper out a couple weeks ago, and a number of people said, well, why did Quad and Walmart work on food waste? You know, what does that have to do with anything? They've set some audacious goals, right? And so I'm the guy who's saying you should set those goals, knowing that you don't necessarily have the technology or the innovation today, but, and it's a key point, you have to back it up by starting to partner and doing the work and showing it at each stage. So the reason Walmart got involved in that was because some of the goals they set around plastics and single-use plastics cannot happen in food today because the supply chain will break down and you won't get food from A to B. So they're doing the work for their goal that's out 15 years yet, now to say, how would consumers react to this? Would they buy it? Then they take that internally and say, here's what consumers think, and by the way, don't work in bakery, work in the salad section. This is where you should work first. That's where you'll get your ROI. So that, from my standpoint, becomes the loop of, now you're talking their language. They all know what ROI means.
I'm so glad you mentioned partnerships, because when we look back and said, how did this come to be that we take used batteries and make new batteries? 80% of the raw materials comes from recycled material. It's 90% less greenhouse gas emissions than going to a mine. That's baseline today. So we're looking at how do we improve on that. But more importantly, we look back and said, how do we even get there? And the key thing was it was never alone. It was with a customer, with Sears. The thin wall polypropylene maintenance-free battery was introduced to the aftermarket by Diehard. And then when those batteries were delivered, the store-door pickup of used batteries was innovated between one of the companies that became Clarios and Sears at the time. That one-for-one exchange kind of took off, and the technology was there, and the tracking systems were there, but it was a collaboration. And so as we look forward to the new types of chemistries and batteries entering the marketplace, there needs to be equal, if not greater, or more accelerated collaboration. So working with the U.S. Department of Energy, we're able to champion a lithium-ion recycling prize that was started under the last administration. And one of the things that I think everyone can agree on, regardless of political bias or view, that we need to challenge ourselves to figure out how to create a circular economy for all batteries. And
Sounds
so
like we're going to be partnering with you very soon.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking here, there's multiple opportunities.
Lots of synergies going on.
But that's where it starts, and the small and medium sized companies that are part of this collaborative team that's going after this X Prize for lithium-ion recycling with the DOE backing is part of that. But we also look beyond traditional business and partnership boundaries to approach NGOs and some of those that were critical of the kind of products we make, and the unfortunate impacts of informal, illegal, and substandard recycling of batteries in low and middle income countries. Now, we don't sell to those markets. That's not our core market, but we sell more batteries of this kind than anyone else in the planet. So we were able to work with not only that NGO, Pure Earth, but the United Nations Children's Foundation, or UNICEF, to create a new kind of partnership called Protecting Every Child's Potential. Yes, it's a philanthropic effort driven through our foundation, but it's really helping us understand what are these economic drivers behind gray market, black market collection of the kind of products we make. It's helping us actually inform that lithium ion recycling ethos and the economic drivers behind that. But more importantly, it's tackling a challenge that is real, that is not only associated with our industry, but is impacting all of us, because every one of us, regardless how we got here or how we communicate, is using the kind of batteries that we make and those technologies. But if we stayed insular to our own organization, we'd be missing these opportunities. So I look forward to actually talking to all of you about this, because you can't move from do less bad to do more good, particularly on your own.
It's great, and it seems like having everything that was discussed here, but having those conversations with the key executives and showing that can kind of help with that evolution from ESG is expense compliance. When you hear all of that, could an executive not see the value? It would be tough after hearing that. Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I appreciate it. It was a great conversation around what's happening in the issuer space.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Trevor.
Trevor.